The rest of psychology feels very anecdotal and soft, and evolutionary psychology feels hard, but because of the unflattering way that it poses human beings. So you've had some exposure to Dr. Buss. This concept of, this is just what I believe, the idea of psychology being a soft science,
Right.
evolutionary psychology being a hard science,
Right.
and evolution and all psychology actually being under the umbrella of evolutionary psychology. Dr. Buss agreed with this idea. Do you see it that way?
I do. Yeah. And I tell you, like, you know, as part of my PhD research, I use genetic algorithms. Genetic algorithms is when you mimic evolution in engineering systems. So you take a bunch of things and you evolve them and you eliminate and all that. It's insane to see that the concept of evolution works when you apply it to designing power tools, as an example.
Yeah.
Or pickup trucks.
Yeah.
Same thing. You have pickup trucks. The best ones mate. They have baby pickup trucks.
Yes.
You just encode the design into a DNA. And it works. So I think at this point, there's no doubt that a lot of who we are is just informed by evolution. So especially evolutionary psychology, because it's not just our physical attributes. It's like what we do with our bodies. That what we do, like how we behave in the society. So anyways.
I know, you have Freud and Jung, and they had their hypothesis when they were growing up. And a lot of the stuff that Freud said, even though he did have some pretty interesting hypotheses, turned out to not be true. Right. But a lot of what he said was coming from, his meetings with a 12-year-old boy while he was snorting cocaine. That's not very scientific. Right. But he is a psychologist. He's a psychiatrist, that is a science. And so what I thought was interesting is in the 1970s, the ideas of like, hey, let's just actually do population level surveys of these things and find out if these things are real. And I think what happened was some of them turned out to be very unflattering for humans in general and the genders specifically. And because of that, I feel like there's this massive pushback on, I feel like evolutionary psychology is the most underrated player in the game, right? Yes. It's that undrafted left tackle who turns into an all-pro and nobody knows his name. Like that's what it feels like to me. Everything in evolutionary psychology is falsifiable, but everything in behavioral psychology isn't.
It's not, yeah.
And because it's falsifiable, then someone tries to falsify it, and no one ever does. The parental investment hypothesis is an idea from evolutionary psychology, which is in any two gender species, the species that does more of the child rearing is always going to be the more selective of the two genders, and there is no exception to this. In every two gender species, they've looked far and wide to try to find it, and there's even a case where there's a certain type of fish in seahorse where the males carry the eggs and they are the pickier of the two genders and the females fight for them. So like it's one of these situations where like in evolutionary psychology, they have a hypothesis, they use the scientific method to test it, and the rest of psychology doesn't do this. The rest of psychology looks at one thing and be like, oh, that's a controlling behavior, or this person is like, they sit there and they throw out the word narcissist when they don't even know what that term means. That's what it feels like. Anecdotal. The rest of psychology feels very anecdotal and soft, and evolutionary psychology feels hard, but because of the unflattering way that it poses human beings, it questions the idea of free will. It makes us seem far closer to our ancestors as hairless murder apes. It compares us very much to other primates and shows that the primates have very similar characteristics to us. It uses examples from the rest of biology to come up with ideas on why humans are the way that they are. And it's really, like, to be fair, some of the conclusions come across are very uncomfortable for people. And so there's a massive pushback. Have you seen that?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the question is, so here's how I think about it. Do I prefer to be told that make me feel good about myself but are untrue? Or do I prefer to know the
I will
truth?
tell you the majority of the universe, the majority of the world wants the first.
Yeah, of course. It is a protection. It's a self-preservation mechanism that we have. But I prefer to know the truth.
I would rather know the truth.
Because once I know the truth, then I can strategize around it. For example, you can build products that actually work better because you understand it. There's a Netflix documentary about chimps. I'm blanking on his name. Have you watched it?
Maybe. I'm not sure.
Okay. It's funny. It follows the story of a few chimp tribes, and it is so close to humans. Like when I was watching it, I was like, this is like, we're almost there.
Yeah, their genetic code is 1.5% off of ours. And when you consider like a species, like say some alien species that would have the same genetic code, but they're 1.5% more advanced than us, then they have like Dyson spheres and interstellar travel. Right. It's just that 1% of genetics.
It makes all the difference.
Then all of a sudden we go from like using a stick to get ants out of a log to throwing fecal matter at each other
Yeah.
to like, the space race.
Right.
That's just 1% different.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, I just thought it was really interesting because like it was so incredible to me that it took years of Joe Rogan living in Austin, Texas, a couple of blocks away from David Buss before he had him on the show. And it took Jordan Belfort, who doesn't really understand evolutionary psychology that well, to finally tell Joe Rogan to have David Buss on. And Joe Rogan, his insignia is a monkey. Like, it was just like, to me, it was like, there's something here where this whole field of study is just being hidden from the world.
Yes.
And it's so, I was looking for evolutionary psychology podcasts. You know how many there are?
None.
One. There's one. It's called Beat Your Genes. And it's these 3 PhDs. I don't know if it's still around anymore. And then there's mine. And then I can't find another one. Maybe Chris Williamson, he's dabbling in this kind of stuff, but it's very rare that you find anyone getting into this. I'll tell you an example. There is a study that was done in the mid 90s. And then there's a subsequent study done by Dr. Buss, which basically went over how many previous sexual partners a woman had before she got married and the likelihood of her divorcing and the likelihood of her cheating. And you and I know, before we do the study, what the answer is going to be.
Yes.
There's obviously a correlation. It's just like, it's so beyond obvious that there's going to be a correlation. Well, of course, they do the study. And of course, there's a correlation. If a woman's been with like 20 men or more, there's like a 17% chance she stays in a marriage. The likelihood of her cheating increases as she's been with more men. And of course, the study they do in, I think it's a university in Turkey that was doing some of these studies, and they continue to do them. But the one in the U.S., like they did one, and they found out this data, and no more studies, no more, no.
Because
We're
they
not,
don't want to cancel.
no more funding for this. We're not finding out that women who sleep with a lot of men are bad wives. No, we can't do these studies. And I was telling my friend about this, and I was like, so if you disagree with this concept, then find a study that says something different. Because I promise you right now, if there was a study done by like Marquette or University of Maryland that showed that as women had more sexual partners, there was zero correlation to divorce, you would instantly win the Nobel Prize in psychology. Instantly win the Nobel Prize. But because you find a positive correlation between the two, it's an unflattering view of women, and therefore these studies cannot be published. Same thing happened to Satoshi Kanazawa, who wrote what's the book? Beautiful People Have More Daughters with David Allen. Yeah. He published a study showing that African American women and Asian men have the hardest time on dating apps. Canceled. Once he posted the study, and the study was totally based in fact, in reality. He's Japanese. He has no interest in this whatsoever. Like, he's not trying to troll anybody. He's literally a Japanese man. He's literally the cohort that he's complaining, that he's saying has a disadvantage. And he was canceled. And I've tried to have him on my show. He doesn't want to come on because of the fact that he's like, I'm worried I'm going to get canceled.
Yeah.
Isn't it crazy that we're at this place?
Academia is like that. It's just these guys I mean, universities are, I lived in academia for a while. It is like that.